Hello, everybody. Anthony Crane here with Pocket Coach, and today's experiment is the product backlog. So it's a very exciting experiment to me. I'm very excited about building product backlogs. So first, let's look at the statement here. The problem is that we need a shared to-do list, right, to collect all of the work we have to do, so we can prioritize it and keep track of it. And that work needs to be value-oriented, not just a to-do list like our work breakdown structures used to be. Hypothesis: if it's on the backlog, it might get done. If it's not on the backlog, it won't get done. Okay. 6 weeks experiment, period of persevere, 2 weeks. If you do this, you should see a definite increase in both productivity and predictability. And in order to actually do the experiment, you have to create a backlog of your product work, and the work represents a value delivery hierarchy, not a work breakdown structure. Okay, so let's get into it. I'm going to start a 5-minute timer and see how far we can get. As always, the first 5 minutes will be the most important, and then after that, we can go into details on stuff. So first off, what is a product backlog? If you understand the whole projects to products movement, and I have 3 articles on Tech Beacon magazine, you can look those up, online magazine, and read those for more details. But in a product mindset, we stop thinking about the world of projects and we start thinking about the world of products. So once you make that pivot, every single piece of work we do either creates a product or improves an existing product. Here in this picture, you can see that there's lots of vocabulary that you've heard here. You've heard of tasks, you've heard of stories. Stories is probably the most common thing. Features, collecting up stories. Some people like to call features epics if they're doing like legacy Scrum, or if they use Jira. If you're using SAFe or many other methodologies, you call it features and epics. So those are the same thing. The epics here, this orange epic, that's from SAFe. That's more like an initiative or a project, right? A bigger thing. And there's even constructs bigger than this, but all of them, no matter what they are trying to help you either improve a product or create a new product. So once you get that product mindset, it becomes a lot easier to start to craft your backlog. So let's get into it. I have a little agenda here. So first off, if it's the first time you've ever created a backlog, then the first thing you have to do is understand the product. In some of my clients, they already have backlogs. I can actually look at their backlog for the quarter or for the year, and I can look and see these are the products that underpin all those things. So when they don't have that mindset, they don't get that on their own, but it's pretty easy to gain. We'll have a video on understanding your product, so we'll talk more about product mindset and really how to identify products in a separate video. But if you want to have a product backlog, you got to know what your product is. Okay, now so stay tuned for that video. In the meantime, once you have your product identified, now all you're going to do is create a to-do list of the major functionality that you would like to see in your product. So just don't worry about how big anything is. Just what are the major things we want it to do? And that's going to be your first cut at a product backlog. And you're going to want to put that in order from the first thing you want to the last thing you want. And again, they're all can be equally important, but imagine you can only get one done at a time. Just put them in order. And if you can do more than one at a time, great, but don't worry about that for now. So for the product backlog, you're just making a to-do list of features or of functionality or of things that you want that product to do. Okay, don't worry about technical stuff. Just what does this product do? If you already have an existing backlog, by the way, or existing product with some stuff in it, we'll talk about how to do that too. All right, so now you got your to-do list. Number 3, for each item on your list, you're going to do a first estimate on time. Right? How long would it take me to build this? And so you know that if you've seen any of my videos on story points, I don't believe in equating points to time. This is completely different. This is a chunk of work, and I'm asking for a first level guess. And so it's either going to be A, B, or C. If you think it's going to take you less than 2 weeks, then what you got is a story. I can get that functionality done in 2 weeks. Beautiful story. Stories should be done in about less than 2 weeks, unless your sprint length is longer, but 2 weeks seems pretty common these days. If you're like, man, there's no way we can get that done in 2 weeks, but it would certainly take us less than a quarter of a year, less than 3 months, then we're going to call that a feature. Now, again, if you're a Jira user, you might call that an epic. Okay, as a SAFe practitioner, I call that a feature. Okay, now more than 1 quarter, if it takes you more than 1 quarter to build this idea, this thing, this part of your product, then it's going to be called an epic. Again, that's if you're using SAFe vocabulary. If not, you can call it an initiative, right? Something like that, but it's a big thing that's going to take us more than 3 months. Okay. So there you have it. When you have your to-do list, you're just basically going to have like a column, and in it, you'll put down the piece of work that needs to be done and whether you think it's a story, feature, epic. Boom, you've got your beginnings of a product backlog. Okay. Now, anything that is an epic you're going to have to think about how to decompose that into features. And we'll have separate videos on how to do feature epic decomposition or initiative decomposition. If you have features, you're going to have to decompose those into stories. And so again, we'll have a separate video on feature decomposition into stories. Now, for the rest of the time, I'm down in my last minute. So let me tell you what would be in the next 5 minutes. One, there's something called enablers. This is work that enables future work. Some people like to call them spikes and stuff like that. Those are a type of enabler. So we're going to talk about enablers. We're going to tell you what to do if you already have an existing backlog. We're going to talk about some of the anti-patterns that we've seen. We're going to, and then talk about a candidate agenda that you might use to do your product backlogs. And then the only other thing that we might cover is kind of a little more on these types here. You know, what they might mean. Nah, we'll wait for their own individual videos for those things. We'll do one last pass on this. Okay, so that's our first 5 minutes. You know what's coming up in the next 5, so if it sounds interesting to you, stick around. I'm going to go ahead and start my next 5-minute timer going into the stuff I just described. So we'll start that. Okay. So let's get back to this. Working with enablers. So enablers are basically work that does not provide direct value to the customer, but needs to be done. So the most common enabler is a task. And you saw that here. You think about it, these tasks are just enablers. What they enable is the story they're connected to, but they themselves are not directly valuable. You know, add a row to a database. That is not a direct value to a customer. The customer doesn't care about databases. They care about their functionality, but it still needs to be done. So they're still worth tracking and planning and figuring out. So tasks are, in a way, an enabler. What makes a task different than a typical enabler is that they can be done in the same sprint as the story they belong to. So this story might take, you know, anywhere from a couple hours to a couple days to even to a full 2 weeks. These tasks can decompose stories into consumable steps. Each of those steps is not directly valuable. They enable the story that contains them. But what happens is a lot of times you have enablers that don't fit. So you have this story you want done, but there's 3 things you got to do to make the story work. But that story would then be bigger than 2 weeks. You're like, well, okay, then maybe that story is a feature and you can decompose it. Well, the other option is to say, you know what, if I had just one enabler story and then one regular story, I could actually just plot these as 2 stories because it's not really feature worthy, if you will. So it's a nice little out, if you will, for when stories are bigger than a sprint. Now, again, you should try to find ways to make your story smaller. That's great. You know, that's awesome, great stuff about that. We can do in a separate video. But the bottom line, tasks are just like enablers, but tasks can be done in the same sprint as their story, and then enabler stories cannot be. There are also enabler features, and it's the same idea. You're like, this feature, man, it's really, if I could do one feature and then a second feature, the first one isn't directly valuable, but it gets me in play for the second one. So you can have enabler features, and by the way, you can even have an enabler epic, but that's a lot of risk. You're talking about creating something that takes more than 3 months, and all it's going to do is enable something else that takes more than 3 months. You're starting, in my opinion, to get into some risk areas. But I've seen into some enabler epics that made sense in my career. So it's definitely a pattern you can use. Bottom line, enablers do not provide direct value. However, they always tie to something that does. You need to be able to show that this enabler enables that specific thing. Okay, so that's what I have here, all kind of in writing, so you can consume that. Starting with an existing backlog. So your backlog may need improvement. I say probably here, that's kind of presumptuous, but if not, go for it. Just use it as is. But if you have an existing backlog and it's not great, it might be full of work to be done or functionality to be built, right? So if it's work to be done, then it's a work breakdown structure, and that's old school Gantt charts and stuff, and that's not the purpose. But what's funny is because the tools have epic feature story, people see, ooh, a hierarchy of work, and so they just make those a hierarchy of work, not a hierarchy of value. And that's the big, brain twist you have to undergo. So stop thinking about work breakdown and start thinking about value breakdown. What is the most viable thing in this product that someone could use right away? So when you decompose epics to features, stories, you're not just splitting it into work, set up a database. You're splitting it into value. Okay, they may not be able to use an ATM to do everything, but maybe if they could just get cash out of it, right? That would be great. So you're looking for value breakdown, not work breakdown. Now, if anything in your existing backlog you have is work, then look at that work and ask, what product does that work belong to? And what functionality is that tied to? And then tie it that way. And so you'll ultimately be able to take your existing backlogs and make those enablers, right? And now at least you'll have a density of how many enablers do we have versus real valuable epics, valuable features. So convert any non-functionality work into subtasks if they're small enough, or enabler stories or enabler features, etc. Subtasks and enabler stories are the same thing. They're work, not functionality. Both types will eventually tie to real functionality. And again, the only difference is that subtasks can be done in the same sprint, enablers cannot. And that's true for feature enablers and epic enablers as well. Okay, anti-patterns. Too far in advance. You don't want to detail out all of your work too far in advance because you're getting into the world of waterfall, but names of work is just fine. So don't confuse those things. Not far in advance, some people like to, some people say, man, our sprint planning goes too long. If we had some stories kind of ready, sprint planning will be faster. Other people hate that. They're like, nope, that's fine. So sprint planning takes a little longer. Scrum Guide says it should take 4 hours. So we're doing better than that. So if you think your sprint planning is too slow, you might do your stories, but no more than 1 sprint in advance, or else you might be facing waste. Whole team together. So a lot of people think that just a scrum master and product owner should do the requirements, should do the stories. No, the whole team needs to be there because we don't write down as much. And so the team needs to hear all the requirement stuff that they normally would have gotten to read in a more traditional world. So make sure the team works on stories together. Product owner solo with other stakeholders. Yeah, the product owner can go with stakeholders and refine. The problem is that the team, had they been there, would have learned. So you might actually even want your team with the stakeholders and the product owner. The product owner facilitates, the team absorbs and learns. All right, that's our second 5. We're going to hit our final 5 minutes, and in the final 5 minutes, all I'm going to do is cover this candidate agenda. And I've kind of said everything I need to say about this slide over here, so I think we're good. Yeah, so we'll just cover the agenda and call it a video. So let's set that one more time. 15 is the max I've had to do. Hopefully I never go over that. Okay, so candidate agenda. Let's say that you are new at Backlog Refinement. Then here's what your initial agenda might be. Once you get really good at it, then you're going to want to flip the agenda. And then some pro tips here. Okay, so first off, worry about your stories. Are they well formed? Are they well decomposed? Remember that if you've seen the value delivery acceleration experiment, we're always supposed to be picking experiments to try to make ourselves better, faster, stronger. Well, in this case, the first experiment for backlogging is that you have well-formed stories and they're well decomposed. We'll have a separate video on how to do that. Once you've mastered that skill, then are your features well prioritized would be your next experiment. Make sure that your features are always in highest to least important, especially when you have many teams working on a single feature. Having feature priority there eliminates a ton of confusion. Now, if I have 5 stories to work on, I work on the ones that are associated with the most important feature. That simplifies my life. After that, if you get good at prioritizing, next is well decomposed, right? So how do you break down features well? And then the third for the feature area, the third experiment here in features is that you write them well. Okay, and again, we'll have separate videos for how to do decomposition and writing of features. Finally, if you've mastered story writing and decomposition, and you've mastered feature writing and decomposition, the next and final piece is epic writing and decomposition. We will have some safe videos, by the way, where we go even deeper into the safe hierarchy of work. Stay tuned for that down the road. But for now, this works for kind of everybody. So epics, again, this is initiatives, not the Jira type epic. Are your epics well decomposed? Have you learned how to take an epic and break it into features? Once you've mastered that skill, the final experiment for epics and the final experiment for this is your epics are well formed. You know how to write them well. So this is kind of like what I do with my new clients who are not used to this kind of backlog. And by the time we run through all 6 of these experiments, they're humming along. They know how to get their product work done. Now, once they master it, we actually flip it. Because now the epic well decomposed is very infrequent. So when we see something happening with an epic, we want to jump right on it and get some understanding. Then we decompose. Features are also much slower moving, but if something's moving, we want to be aware of it. And so the same thing here. And then finally, we look at stories. So because these happen so infrequently, we often tidy these up. Now, during sprint planning, for example, in sprint planning, we always hit features. Okay, we're like, are they well prioritized? Are they well formed? Are they well decomposed? And then when we do our sprint planning, we actually go feature by feature and say, can we get the first feature done completely? And if that fills up the sprint, the next feature waits. But if we're like loading up the sprint and the feature is maybe we can only do part of it and other parts just have to wait for many reasons, we will go on to a second feature and pull some of its stories. If we want to do the least amount of in parallel feature work, we want to get features to done wherever possible, but then fill our capacity when that's not possible. Okay, final pro tip here. We do use a swarm tag. And so we put swarm on any item that we need all minds on. So that can help you. So to find items to sprint, to swarm on, use on the backlog view to swarm stories or features that need some kind of attention. Backlog story refinement, again, 1 sprint ahead is usually pretty typical. I like teams who don't do any ahead work. I think that's kind of cool, but I've been on teams that do 1 sprint ahead. I resist strongly working more than 2 sprints ahead. Now that seems to fly in the face of SAFE's, quarterly planning. We'll talk about that in one of our quarterly planning videos down the line. And then feature refinement, only features that will play in the next mid-range planning increment should you bother looking at. In other words, the next quarter. So in SAFE, that's a program increment. That's typically 10 weeks. For non-SAFE, any cadence you want, but typically 13 weeks or 1 quarter. I love the 13-week cadence, by the way, and I could probably do a video on that topic as well. 13-week cadences are awesome. And you can do this without violating the rules of agility. So even though it seems like you're going into waterfall because you're looking that far ahead, you're not. And so stay tuned for some of our quarterly planning videos to see why that's true. All right, well, I'm Anthony Crane, whole 15 minutes just on product decomposition, but I hope you found it valuable, and we will see you on the next video. I'm Anthony Crane with Backlog.